Hello everyone, this is Ankit Sharma and you're watching Bharat EV Talks, a podcast series by All India EV. This is the seventh episode and in this episode we have Mr. Vishwanath with us. Welcome sir, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ankit. Thank you for your warm welcome. It's an honor to be here.
So sir, before getting to know about your personal journey of starting Steam A, can you give us a brief about what you are doing on Steam A, what kind of a EV product you are launching, you have produced and what you guys are doing for the EV market?
Sure. Steam A as an organization is on the mission of making work and life sustainable, impactful, and memorable. That's a pretty broad statement there. So, within the broad sustainability arena, looking at the various SDGs that interest us, we picked up a few that we want to focus in. So, pretty much all of our work is in the space of energy, utilities, and in the last couple of years, predominantly electric vehicles. So we do consulting as well as product development. So consulting is across all the industries and segments I've spoken about. With product development, we are quite highly focused on EV charging management.
Okay.
We are building a digital twin for the management of EV charging networks and infrastructure. And
Sure.
the first product within that platform is already out, and we're getting good reviews from the market. It's a
Mhm.
charging management system software for charge
Okay.
point operators to remotely monitor and
Mhm.
manage their networks. And
Mhm.
currently, 65,000 approximately users are already using it, and we're getting some really good feedback from the industry. But we're also
Okay.
adding additional modules around energy management, which makes it more efficient, energy efficient from a usage
Mhm.
perspective, as well as asset
Mhm.
management, where we reduce the costs of interventions, prevent and minimize asset failures or charger failures. So overall, our desire is to make EV charging more reliable on the one side and more energy efficient on the other side. So if people were to ask me in a one-liner, I would say we're trying to give non-Tesla drivers the Tesla kind of charging experience. That's what we want to drive
That's
towards, and we've taken a
that's really
software-only route to that.
that's really great. That's really great.
Thank you.
So, sir, can you take us about your journey of starting Steamay? I mean, when it came to your mind, what was the inception point? What was the eureka moment for you that okay, EV is the market where you need to go, and what you were doing before that?
Okay, so I'm an electronics and communication engineer by qualification, batch of 2006 from PSG Tech in Coimbatore. I then worked with Mindtree for a couple of years in Bluetooth research, enjoyed my time there, and I then joined IIM Bangalore for the postgraduate program in management, which is like the main flagship MBA kind of program there. And I was there for 2 years, 2008 to 2010, and it was around then that I decided to focus my career on the energy sector, right? Because I felt both social welfare benefits from it as well as it was a large industry with a lot of a good business opportunity as well.
Mhm.
So my internship back then was with the Mahindra Group, and I nudged them to give me some kind of an energy-related project, and they kindly
Mhm.
obliged. I delivered a market entry strategy for the Mahindra Group to enter the solar sector. This I'm talking about 2009, right?
Oh,
So subsequently, then once I completed my program, I joined a business called Enzen Global. They were into consulting and
okay.
operations management in the energy space,
Mhm.
and I was recruited by
Mhm.
their UK division. So 2010, I moved with family to the United Kingdom. I started out as a business analyst, but over the next 10 years, I had a really good experience at Enzen where I managed to, I had the privilege or opportunity of getting involved in various different programs, in various different roles. Had a really good
Mhm.
entrepreneurial experience there, winning new customers, delivering large programs, ensuring all our promises were met, and so on. So over these 10 years, from 2010 till 2020, I had a lot of learning about how to run a business, how to make sure the cash flows work, how to build a team that would stay together for a while, how to give them a good experience where they are with you not just because they're getting paid a salary, but they believe in your story and your vision and how you rally the troops together. Lots of different
Mhm.
things. So had a lot of good learnings there, commercial learnings, legal learnings, lots of different things. So that was really my breeding ground in terms of learning how to run a business unit or a business successfully. Had my share of scars from failures there, share of glory from successes. So it was a very enjoyable experience there. So I'm an out and out energy and utilities person. So that's really where I started up from. And then I quit Ensign in 2020 after being with them for 10 years. So I then joined another company called Scube. I was with them for a year, working with the founder on business growth and creating newer relationships, I mean, getting an entry into newer customers and so on. But that was the year of COVID. So, like everybody, my wife and I, we were doing some introspection as well. And we thought now it's probably a good time to get back to India and be with family. So that's when
Yeah.
I quit from Scube. We had a good run there. We had a good year of growth, and they've continued to grow well after that as well. But I felt it wouldn't be right for me to be in an organization when my heart was elsewhere. So that was around the time I then quit and started up on my own. So Steam A was formed with the vision of pulling together an A team with basically uh, a team full of scientific artists, right, or artistic scientists. I know this might sound a bit cringy here, but what you see in the background, right, that's really what we stand for. Our team of 30 plus people now. Everybody is a techie, but each and every person is an actual artist as well. And our belief is that gives us the ability to design and build things that we'll be proud of, where every technological product that we make is also a piece of art, or at least that's how we approach it. Right? So design is something we really are really proud about and are highly focused on. So that's really the thinking and the vision behind setting up Steam A to
Mhm.
contribute to the energy and utility sectors, to support the transition of the world towards net zero positions, but to do that with an artistic viewpoint, right? To make sure the solutions are landed and the outcomes are delivered. So initially, for the first 1 year, we were focusing more on consulting kind of solutions, but increasingly, I was looking at areas around areas that gave us an opportunity for the classic hockey stick style growth, right? An area where the world needed something, where there was a tidal
Mhm.
wave about to start, and so on. And I was keeping my eyes and ears open on this. And that's when I kind of stumbled upon the opportunities that lie within the EV sector. And that's when I
Mhm.
realized, all right, if governments around the world were starting to ban the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles from 2030,
Yes.
2035, and so on, and on the other side, large businesses, major global automakers, they were starting to announce their intent and desire to stop R&D on petrol and diesel. In fact, players like
Mhm.
Mercedes-Benz have gone on record to say we are now completely committing ourselves to an all-electric fleet. That's really the journey they've already started to go towards. And when you look at players like
Mhm.
Jaguar Land Rover, quite a few of these large names globally, them starting to declare the same intent, then you get to feel that, okay, something is really happening here. We are seeing a
Yes.
scale of change that hasn't happened in about
Mhm.
100 plus years now. Like the last change we saw to this scale in the automotive sector was probably in the early 1900s when people started actually buying cars. So that's the sense I got, and I felt like, all right. Usually, when you look at people who get into the EV space, they would come in from either energy or technology or the automotive sector. So these are the three sources. So for me, energy and technology is all I've done. And there is a bit of automotive in the family. So my in-laws run their own business in auto component manufacturing. So I'm kind of, it's been part of the family life anyway.
Mhm.
So for me, it was almost quite natural to slowly ease into the EV sector. And that's really
Mhm.
how I got into exploring this. But from an exploratory stage to picking out exactly what we wanted to do and how we were going to go about with this, it was good for me to reconnect with Pon Ganesh, one of my former colleagues from Mindtree. We reconnected after 12, 13 years or so. And in that time,
Mhm.
Pon had raked up quite some good experience from Europe on EV charging. Right? He had the opportunity to lead some large product development teams for a large CPO, and he kind of led their product development initiatives while they grew from 3,000 chargers on the network to about 48, 49,000 chargers on their network.
Oh,
So he
that's
had a
that's really
ringside view of
amazing.
absolutely, and he had a ringside view of all the problems they faced over that growth journey, and he understood
Mhm.
the clear strategic priorities that CPOs in Europe had, and which of the
Mhm.
problems were they already picking up by themselves, and which problems were kind of being left, and so on. And that's where we put our heads together. So my energy sector background, Ponzi EV charging experience, and we said, okay, this is
Mhm.
what we think needs to be done. If public charging is at a pretty abysmal rate of reliability of say 60 to 80%, then we need to do something about it. And that's really how we started with focusing on how do we reduce failure rates in public EV charging by focusing on good well-designed operational processes, energy management, as well as asset management, and predict and prevent failures of chargers even before it actually happens. That's kind of how we got into this.
That's really amazing journey. And as you mentioned, post COVID, you came back to India. So thank you for coming back to India. You mentioned about the energy management. Energy management solution. Uh, I think you will agree with me that India has always been a power generating sector first. We don't care about transmission and consumption. Consumption and always it has never been a priority to say government and anyone else. I mean, if it has been a if it would have been a priority, then we would have BLDC fans much earlier than what we are using right now, because we don't talk about the consumption. We talk about just generating. We need more power, generate more. We need more power, generate more. And that's where losses comes in. And you and I, as an engineers from engineering background, electrical engineering background, we understand the losses. And now I'm also getting to know a lot of charger manufacturers are integrating their energy management solution within their charger. And when I inquire about it, their thought was the same, that they don't want people to think about their power consumption, because they know they will never think about it, and it will lead to the failure of the grid. All of a sudden, a lot of vehicles will be attached, connected with the charger, withdrawing a lot of power. It will create a kind of a scenario in future. So they are putting this energy management solution so that that can be avoided in future. How do you see this? I mean, from tech point of view, how do you see these kind of stuff happening around, not just the world but Indian market as well? And how charge point operators, from charge point operators, how they are keen of adopting these kind of solution with the charger, because in the market there are basic chargers as well, and there are chargers with the very good facilities, tech innovation included in them. So can you share some light on the same?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you covered quite some ground in that one question, actually. So it was great to listen to you with all the various perspectives and points you raised there. I fully agree, right? So with respect to demand, there needs to be a lot of focus in terms of energy demand and how we can manage things from that side, because just generating more and more electricity is never going to be the only answer. And if you look
Exactly.
at the kind of technical and commercial losses we've been seeing in India in the transmission and distribution space. Sometimes you look at things like 60 to 70% of energy getting generated does not get paid for, and a lot of that is lost along the way in transmission and so on. So there is quite a lot to be done in that space. Now, some of my initial introductions to these challenges happened in the UK, right? So we worked with a lot of gas and power networks. In fact, it was interesting to see. So we did do at Enzen, we used to do a lot of work with the control rooms in the gas distribution networks in the country, and we also worked with the control rooms in the electricity sector. Previously, we used to be able to predict exactly when there has been an advertisement in a very popular
Mm.
TV show that has been running for decades in the UK. There's a show called
Okay.
Coronation Street, which has been running for like 50, 60 years, if I remember right. Right. And so you can, if you sit in the control room, you know exactly the point of time where the advertisement has come on, because there'll be a sudden spike in the electricity usage there, right, as well as in the gas usage, because that's when people are turning on their kettles, they're starting to make some tea for themselves to drink, right? So it was that kind of a scenario where you can actually, looking at customer demand, you knew exactly what was happening in some special instances like this. And in general, what we used to always do is carry out inspection, rather not inspection, sorry, maintenance and service kind of activities at around 2 or 3 early morning. Right, that's when usage of energy is at its lowest. So it's the time where
Mm.
you can have least impact on customers if at all something goes wrong. But over the last few years, what's happened is nighttime usage of electricity has been steadily increasing because people come back home and plug their vehicle in. Now, the interesting bit about electricity when compared to the other utility commodities like gas or water, is that electricity needs to be consumed and produced parallelly for lowest cost, right? So you just produce
Mm.
and consume it instantly. Whereas with respect to gas or water, you can just store it pretty easily. Storage is not too expensive. In fact, you can even store gas and water in the pipelines themselves, right? That also serves. The gas pipes and water pipes serve as storage capacity themselves. Whereas with electricity, that's not the case. So you've got to produce and consume in parallel. And where you do invest in storage, it's not going to be cheap. So that's something that we need to look at here. So when we are shifting such a large load from alternate other fuels such as petrol and diesel to electricity in the energy mix, then a lot of thought needs to be given to energy management. Because all of a sudden, if all night long you need a lot more electricity than was ever required before, then everybody from the energy producers to the transmission companies to the distribution companies, everybody's got to do things differently. It's not going to do nothing is not an option really. And that's where, as sort of key players in the mix, key players in the energy nodes, charge point operators have a major responsibility now to make sure that they put in smart systems and processes in place to work with the energy networks and make things a lot more flexible than before. Right? And our energy management roadmap is entirely based on this, right? So we're looking at multiple levels of smart charging. Now, you're right that some charger makers are starting to include some fundamental energy management features in their chargers, but we do believe there is a lot to be done. There is quite some distance to go ahead in this. For example, in our product, we are already demonstrating this in a couple of different places. So, in one location, we have five different sources of energy, right? So solar, wind, grid power, and some diesel generator capacity, as well as a battery capacity at site. And our system is there, our software is at location. So our software platform is called Iris, and this particular variant is Iris Energy, which does energy management for EV charging. And then we have a number of loads in the same site. So five different sources of electricity, and then a few different loads, including a couple of EV chargers. So what our software does here is to look at which of the sources is most efficient at any point in time, because the cost per unit of electricity produced by solar power, produced through solar sort of generation, is different from that from wind, from grid, and so on. So there's always an efficiency question there to say, okay, which is my cheapest source of power at this point in time? And equally, if there's a bit of an issue with supply and demand management, if your supply is lower than the demand at any point in time, then there is a need to manage your demand actively. And that's where our software will then throttle the EV chargers, right, in the site to make sure that the site does not really blow a fuse or throw the grid out or something like that. Right? So that's one example of where we're already doing something. Plus, our fleet management solution, fleet charging management solution, looks
Okay.
at this to a greater level of detail, where depending on the amount of energy you have and the amount of energy predicted for the next 12 hours, 24 hours, and so on, it will automatically manage your load. So if you have, let's say, five vehicles connected to five chargers at a site, our software will then say, okay, this one is an ambulance, so we better charge it at full speed right away. This one is a car or a truck that is meant to go out at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, and right now it's 6 p.m. So if we charge this car right now, we're going to use peak power costs. Right. So in India now, at least a lot of our customers are based in Tamil Nadu. There is time of use tariff. So your electricity per unit cost can vary between 6 rupees a unit and 9 rupees a unit. So that's depending on the time of use, then you might actually spend 50% more on your electricity bills. So with that being the case, our software then takes care of managing all of this to say, hey, yes, you've plugged it now at 6 in the evening, but the car is going to remain plugged in without getting charged. Midnight or later, once our prices come back down, we'll then start charging you at this speed. So by the time the car needs to start at 8 tomorrow morning, it'll have a full battery, things of these kinds. So how do we manage the software? How can it manage things autonomously without a human being telling it what to do? Right. So we're starting there, but our journey is increasingly going towards things like ISO 15118, where our software will then enable interactions, smart interactions and negotiations with the electricity grids, where everything from the sanctioned load, the cost of electricity, all of that, we'll be able to do real-time negotiations. And as in when I say we, the software will do it autonomously, so without human intervention. So those are the kind of things we are looking at with respect to flexible demand management. There are protocols such as OpenADR, ISO 15118, and so on and so forth. Those are things we are building. The next level then is about bidirectional charging, right? So where we start looking at EVs as really batteries and computers on wheels. So instead of having a UPS at home, I can have an electric car and draw out electricity when I need to. And if somebody's got 1,000 chargers across the country, they can use that network every time a car is plugged in to use that as a as a power bank of sorts for the entire electricity grid itself. And that's not even science fiction, right? So already in America, in the United States, there are a lot of operational services being delivered, especially on the back of the recent blackouts they experienced in the last 2, 3 years. They've now got systems in place where school buses, right? They have a lot of electric school buses. Now these buses are only used for about 3 hours in a day, right? So the remaining
Awesome.
21 hours, they're just standing around doing nothing. In those cases, they're getting plugged into the network, and if there is any network issue, then these buses are used as an emergency source of backup power for the entire grid, all right, depending on what they can offer. So these are all the various things we are looking at with respect to energy management. So we got
Awesome.
the
This
core product in place already, and based on customer needs, we are continuing to develop further additional modules and functionality.
Great. I think this is the perfect time to have this energy management solution on board because, uh, not in residential but commercially, the time of day variable tariff is there. And if I'm not wrong, by 2025, the residential sector will come into that particular segment where there would be a variable tariff. And at that time, I think people will start thinking about their consumption pattern, how, when, and how to consume.
Absolutely.
And of course, bi-directional chargers, bi-directional solution is going to help a lot. I know a couple of companies who are working on that particular solution, and it is really going to help. It doesn't matter if they are owning a small two-wheeler or a three-wheeler or a big car, but yeah,
Right.
with the bi-directional V2G system, this is going to help them a lot. Coming back to
Absolutely.
I mean, you work with charge point operators, right?
Yeah.
Apart from the ROI, because ROI is something, because we still don't have enough electric cars or electric uh, cars or buses that can help a charge point operator to gain its investment. I mean, apart from the ROI, what are the tech challenges they are facing? And I mean, in those challenges, how Steam is providing the solution, or if there is a solution for them.
Sure. So, firstly, I would say if you're delivering a good service to your customers with a good infrastructure in place, I think ROI challenges are also not as big as we think they are. Right? I do know at least a couple of players in the industry, charge point operators in India, who are doing pretty well actually because their quality of service is good, so customers keep coming back to them. They have pretty good utilization rates, which means they're already starting to be a bit of positive, and they're already looking at pretty short payback periods for their investments and so on. I don't want to say much more without having the relevant people in the room, but I do see this as not uncommon in the Indian industry. So good ROI is possible if you have the right infrastructure and right software systems processes in place.
It's
Now
more
if I
like a
put that
position
aside,
charger where it is positioned. If it is positioned at the right spot, ROI can be achieved. And if it's, I see, I mean, in Delhi NCR, there are a lot of charger I see, they go
right,
underutilized and they are not even utilized once or twice a day, or not even once or twice a week. So it's more of a,
right,
it's like real estate kind of a stuff. If your knowledge of
yes.
real estate is good, you can get a good return. And if it's not, you have to wait till the market reaches to that particular point.
Right. No, that's great. Fantastic point, actually. It is actually like a real estate business because eventually it's all down to location on the one side. That makes a huge difference to start with. Where do you place your chargers? And then after that, it's about what kind of chargers do you have? How are you managing them? What software do you have? What kind of customer experience processes do you have in place? All of that makes a difference because it is true that customers do face quite some anxiety when they're traveling intercity in an electric car. Right now, people talk about range anxiety generally. I believe it's a bit of a myth because anybody who's owned an electric vehicle will know that in like 2, 3 days you get used to how far the car can go. You would rarely be caught without enough electricity to do what you need to do, enough charge to do what you need to do. But having said that, intercity travel can get a bit can give you some anxiety because even if there are chargers along the route, you can't be too sure whether it will actually work. Right. So
Of
as I
course.
tell people, I believe range anxiety is a bit of a myth, but service anxiety is very real. Okay, and that's part of what we're trying to solve. So if I look at the major problem areas or opportunities that charge point operators have to address their services, uh, one is to look at how do you inform yourself? How do you decide where you need to put the next charger out? Okay. So you might choose to, you might have an investment of or lakhs and so on, and you have the whole world ahead of yourself. So how do you decide where is the next best location for you to have a charger out? Now that is one question where they need to make better use of the data available to make these
Hmm.
choices. Now within the Iris platform, we have an analytics business insight platform called Sense, where we give this guidance to our customers, where we have heat maps and geographical heat maps, which look at multiple sources of data to give our customers advice on, hey, these are the next best locations for you to look at in terms of placing charges out. Now, associated with that is another thing, right? So there is a major question that anybody who's got money and wants to put it in the right place will think about, which is, let's say I have, I don't know, 200 chargers out in my network now, and I want to invest 1 more crore in my business. Do I use this 1 crore to put a few more charges out and add to my network, or should I use this to carry out better repair and maintenance activities and offer a better service with just the same number of charges I already have, right? So do I take the capex route or do I take the opex route? Now that is something where I think for a lot of players in the market currently, that decision is already made. So a lot of them are in land grabbing mode where, because their valuations are based on the number of chargers that are on their network, they keep throwing newer chargers out. But they also need to look at the fact that customers will very quickly lose trust in you if your existing chargers don't work as well as they should. Right? And I
Hmm.
keep telling this to people, when you open some charge point operators apps in India and you see over 50 to 60% of their chargers not being functional, and that is even before you attend site, right? And once you go to
Hmm.
site, even the remaining 40%, you might face some challenges. Now, when you think about the fact that these are chargers that have been installed in the last 2 years, like 1 to 2 years, that's when the network expansion has been pretty fast. And
Hmm.
despite being that early in their life, if these chargers are falling like a pack of cards while they're still within warranty, then what confidence do these businesses have that 4 years, 5 years, 8 years down the line, when the chargers are
Hmm.
still expected to have some economic life left, how predictably can you manage them and offer services there? So that is one area where we do believe CPOs really need to focus on this, which is where we've got our predictive asset management module in place. We call it R1, which is
Hmm.
basically saying we want to target having a reliability coefficient of 1, meaning 100% reliable. Even if that's theoretical, that's just a vision we would like to have in this space. So we're using various data sources to do two things. One, identify those instances in the network where a charger has actually failed, even if it is not giving you that message via OCPP. Because OCPP gives you some failure and alert messages, but it doesn't really catch everything that's out there. But we've built in about 38, 39 different cases of where a mistake or a failure has happened on the ground, but you are blind to it because OCPP has not alerted to it. Our approach has
Hmm.
always been to look at OCPP as just one source of data. It's not everything for us. But even if you take OCPP out, we can deliver a lot of value to our customers through the other things we look at. Right. So that's something we do where we look at issues that have already happened, but are blind. We are blind to them. The other thing we do then is predictive models, asset failure models, where we then look at, okay, if this continues, this particular component in this charger will likely fail, and this is the likelihood of failure in the next 1 to 2 months, and so on and so forth. Now that
Hmm.
gives us the ability to tip off customers, as in CPOs, before the failure actually happens. That means end customer is not impacted, CPO's revenue is protected, as well as the reputation in the minds of the end users is good, which means future revenue is safeguarded. And because you have a bit of advance notice now to say, okay, if you're not careful, this particular charger, this component is going to fail in this time, you can actually be efficient about your interventions as well. You don't need to send somebody out in panic. You can, while somebody's traveling in that direction, you can ask them to just dip in and have a quick look at and do this. So, and that's what I mean by ROI, where you protect your revenue as well as reduce your costs of interventions. Now, that is something a lot of CPOs do not have the right tools and information for them to be able to do that right now. And that's where we are solving those problems with Iris R1. Right. So these are a few important areas to look at. The other bit that's currently, I think, it needs a lot of focus is customer experience. Right. I find that now customers in India are very forgiving in this particular instance because we are just going beyond the initial enthusiast, activist kind of users of electric vehicles. Now, when you go and wait at a charger and talk to people who come and take the service, you do see a lot of laymen who have no interest in energy sector or sustainability or who are not driven by any of these messages. They simply bought an electric car because they were hoping it's a good experience and it's cheaper to run, right? Now, in that case, there needs to be a lot more of focus on customer experience. A year or two back, if your charging rates, your failure rates were high, high failure was tolerated then because somebody who bought a Tata Nexon 3 years back was bound to be a bit of a nerd, a bit of a geek who wanted to play with this toy that has come out. And they would be a lot more forgiving about mistakes. But now, as we start addressing the wider common men and women more and more, we need to be a lot more conscious about the customer delight we create. We should not rely on the fact that they are used to poor service so far. Right? That should not be taken for granted. That's another area where I do believe they need to use technology more.
Yes. As you mentioned about the predictive analysis which you guys are using on a platform, I was speaking to one of our battery manufacturer and one of again a vehicle manufacturer as well.
Right.
Someday back, and both were very keen on this particular subject. I mean, the vehicle manufacturer said that okay, we use predictive analysis to understand uh, where their vehicle is being driven and if that area has proper charging stations or not,
Yeah.
and that information is shared with the charge point operators, and then at the same time how battery is performing. There are certain parts where the roads are not good, so there is a certain spike in the battery consumption voltage.
Yeah.
There's a certain spike which they gather all this data, and then they share this data with the right authorities that these are the areas where you need to work on and invest on the entire infrastructure. So we can
Right.
rightly say that this ev is not traditionally it's just the automotive sector. It's much more than that. It's much bigger than that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a fantastic point there. I can fully agree with it. I think it comes with it because EVs are expensive. They generally put in a lot more technology in it, so a lot more value can be delivered, and that gives us additional opportunities of the kind you've described now. Definitely, it will drive improvement in the infrastructure, and that's part of the desire as well. And yeah, that's when it starts to become truly a no compromise solution, right? So as long as you drive enough kilometers for the year, it's a lot cheaper to run an EV compared to a petrol or diesel vehicle. The driving experience is amazing, right? And anybody who's driven any EV in the market that has a sports mode would agree with this, right? So if you enjoy accelerating, then you need to try the instant torque that an electric vehicle can give you. So it's cheaper, it's good for the environment, it's good for your pocket, it's good for your heart and brain, and for all the joy and endorphins you want to have. So why not? Okay.
you know um, One question has always been in my mind that okay, evs are good for a lot of things, but how it is good for as an end user life,
Mm,
not just a health, not health but life as a philosophical point of view. So I was speaking to one of my friend who bought the early version of Tata Nexon ev,
right.
and after using it for 6 7 months he said okay, I have the answer for you. And I was like, what's the answer for this question? He said ev teaches you to ev takes your life away from the hustle. It teaches you okay, you have to spend those 4 5 hours waiting to get it charged. You can't do anything.
Okay.
So you get into a
Right.
kind of a process where these 3 hours, even or even there is a ultra fast charging in 1 hour. That 1 hour you can't do anything. You have to sit back and relax. So
Right.
that is something which is coming up. And he said, okay, just imagine this thought comes in up. Let's just say even just 1% of the entire global population,
Yeah.
the world will be a totally different place because that thought process they will start integrating in other stuff as well. So yeah,
Right.
not just the automotive but data, predictive, and then philosophical. EV has a lot of things to offer to the market.
That's very interesting, actually. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, it does make sense, actually. Yeah, I can see the logic behind that. What it did do
Mhm.
for me, though, is ever since I started driving an electric vehicle, it did massively change my driving style. Right, I started to be a lot more. So I'm self-confession. I am a typical BMW driver. Right, so in the UK, I used to have BMWs more often than not. So I enjoyed the thrill of driving a machine like that. But then once I started driving an electric vehicle, of course, I still love to accelerate where it's safe to and so on the main roads and things like that. But otherwise, my driving style has changed massively. So in an electric vehicle, typically your uh, uh, how quickly you accelerate and how quickly you brake, all of these have an impact on how much juice and how many kilometers you can extract from a full battery. Right now, it's exactly the same even with petrol and diesel vehicles, but we just don't worry about it there. But in this case, because the range is limited, a bit more limited than you have in petrol and diesel vehicles, we become a lot more conscious about it, which means we actually become better drivers on the road. Right? We become less of
Exactly, exactly.
nuisances and very conscious about how we are on the road. But the philosophical point you raised is pretty interesting.
That's true. So, towards the end, this is the something which I ask from everyone. Let's just say there is someone in the second or third year of their engineering college, and they are seeing this market, evolving market, EV market, or in your case, the entire energy market. The this is this in the last 4 5 years, energy first, and then now EV has become one of the biggest market. And if they are looking into this market to enter and start their career, what are the things they need to get started right now? Because you and I both know the level of education in India, and even though if it's a very premium college, doesn't matter the kind of a stuff which is taught there, still not as per the industry standards. So what kind of advice you would like to give to them?
Okay, great. Oh, fantastic question, actually. Because the EV industry, there is a lot associated with upskilling and training people for the industry. Because that's something I came across this in the UK as well. There were some mechanics who actually lost their lives when they tried to service an electric vehicle without realizing that there was a battery in it. So when a battery at that voltage discharges through you, you have no hopes of surviving, right? So which means there is a lot of a lack of understanding, awareness, knowledge, technology, know-how in the industry across the entire value chain that's out there. So addressing these knowledge gaps and skill gaps is one major area that the EV industry has to get together to address, especially because when the moment you make this switch, right, you're pretty much rendering a lot of other businesses bankrupt. When you look at petrol bunks in our future, you won't really need that many of them or hardly any of them. Then what are they all going to do? You look at mechanics, you look at garages, you look at all these service sheds and so on. What are they going to do in future? So education and training is one major focus area that the EV industry has to look at and take a lot more serious of a look at it beyond what would normally be considered okay. But a couple of things I would say specifically to students who are in that kind of age group, age bracket that you mentioned. One is see, with electric vehicles and EV charging, it's not enough to be a unidimensional engineer, right? If
Mm,
you're an electrical engineer, you're not good enough. If you're a mechanical engineer, you're not good enough. When I say good enough, I don't mean in quality. I'm saying in terms of
mm,
solving problems, you may not be able to do much just by yourself. So it is
mm,
a field where interdisciplinary understanding and knowledge makes a big difference in terms of how quickly and how well you can solve problems. So especially when
of
you look
course.
at a lot of these, we work with a lot of colleges and universities, and we routinely take part in the competitions and challenges they all work with. Invariably, anything that involves an electric vehicle, you'll see people from electronics and communication, computer science, IT, automotive, mechanical, in some cases civils and so on, right, for various purposes and reasons. So it is an industry which craves for multidisciplinary engineering talent. Okay, so if you are already doing your basic course in PCE, IT, computer science, mechanical, whatever it might be, then do actively consider what else can you learn? How else can you make yourself a bit more relevant for the sector by adding one more feather to your cap, right? So do look at it in that direction. The other thing I would say is this is more about the purpose of why you should be in the EV sector, right? Now, people will come and say, we're not selling too many EVs yet. People will come and say, maybe hydrogen will go ahead. So you'll have all these people seeding doubts in your mind, right? So now the purpose
Mm,
for why I am doing what I'm doing is I feel like we are at the cusp, or we're already along a journey that happens very rarely, right? I feel very confident that nobody in the world has gone through this kind of shift in their lifetimes. Anybody alive today? hasn't seen this kind of a huge shift in an entire industry within their lifetime. So this is something I constantly look back to for inspiration, right? In 1860s, Rockefeller in the US, he started the Standard Oil Co, right? And he ran that business for about 50 years. Then when they became a bit too big, a bit too powerful, they were broken down by the United States government, the authorities, basically saying, look, you are a huge monopoly, you're controlling the entire oil industry, so we do need to break you down. And they were broken down into something like 33, 34 companies, right? I'm talking about 1909, 1910, and so on. 34 companies were created from one company back then, and today, those 34 companies have grown over these last 120 plus years to massive presence in terms of scale. So if you look at something like ExxonMobil, you look at Chevron Energy, they've all got revenues per year of about 250, $300 billion per year, right? That kind of scale is humongous. I'm not talking about valuation, I'm talking about annual revenue, right? And if two out of those 34 companies have got $500 billion of revenue per year, now imagine the kind of impact a single person, one single John D. Rockefeller had on an entire industry, on the entire world, like the scale of the impact of his achievement. That is possible today, right? That is possible today because the entire automotive industry is shifting. All the legacy automakers are struggling. That's very visible. That's very evident out there, right? Nobody's able to give. For the first time in history, an electric car has become the most common, the most popular model in the world. By popular, I mean by number of units sold, right? Tesla Model Y is now the most, is the vehicle that sells the most number of units globally.
Mm,
Now, previously that used to be a Toyota model, I think the Corolla, if I'm right. So who would have thought an electric vehicle will displace a petrol vehicle as the
mm,
most popular selling vehicle globally? And that's already happened, right? And the larger, older automakers are sitting, staring, wondering what to do. So for all of you young folks who are looking at entering, or looking at making career choices, this particular industry is at a very interesting point, which rarely comes through in anybody's lifetimes. So I think it's
Fantastic.
worth exploring this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing all these insights with us, with what Steam A is doing and how you have, how was your journey, and most importantly, you shed the light on the charge point operators business model and what kind of challenges they are facing. It's really good to see that companies out there solving those problem. Companies like you. It was really nice talking to you. It was very informative, and thank you for giving your time to us, sir.
Thank you, Ankit. I enjoyed having this conversation. It's always nice to speak to somebody who understands the space, right? So the moment you ask some question, I can see where you're coming from. Some of your observations, I've made mental notes of them. So I find this conversation quite enriching. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.